The rain had fallen all afternoon, turning the dusty streets of Dust Creek into a dark mire. The air smelled of wet wood, trampled manure, and the sour smoke that leaked from low chimneys. Lanterns flickered in the plaza as if doubting their own light. Ethan Carter, 30 years old, but with a face lined as if he carried 50, walked steadily toward the dusty trail inn. He had spent months hauling freight across the northern routes, and that night he came only to collect his pay. But the town did not receive him like any other traveler. Something in the silence between adobe walls, in the shadows peeking out from behind curtains, told him Dust Creek was hiding a secret. Inside the inn, the air was thick. A couple of men lay drunk across the tables, mouths open and breath reeking of spilled whiskey. Behind the counter, Hank Rourke, a man with swollen cheeks and eyes that never smiled, looked him up and down. "You're late, Carter," he spat in his greasy voice. "But here's your money." He dropped a few coins on the bar as if tossing scraps to a dog. Ethan said nothing. He gathered them calmly. Just as he turned toward the door, a sound stopped him. It was faint, little more than a muffled whimper coming from the hallway that led to the rooms. Ethan knew that sound. It was not the cry of a sick woman, nor the moan of a willing prostitute. It was a stifled sob, the kind of weeping hidden out of fear. He stood still, his hand resting on the buckle of his belt. The years on the frontier had taught him to hear danger in a breath. The sound came again, clearer this time, like a knife, cutting through wood. "Not your business," Rourke growled, sensing his movement. "Just damaged goods." The cynical tone burned in Ethan's ears. He moved forward without looking at Rourke, each step heavier than the last. At the end of the hallway, a door stood ajar. He knocked with his knuckles. The hinges creaked, revealing a narrow, windowless room lit only by a half-dying lamp. There, sitting against the damp wall, was Clara Dawson. Her sun-browned skin glistened with sweat, and her torn, ill-fitting dress barely covered her. But what stopped Ethan was not her half-nakedness. It was her eyes, dark, shining, filled with a pride that clung to life with desperate defiance. "You've seen me like this," she said in a low, hoarse voice. "Now you'll have to marry me, or they'll kill us both." Ethan did not know how to answer. The logic of her words escaped him, but the fear behind them was as real as the damp dripping from the walls. "Who keeps you here?" Ethan finally asked. Clara clutched the torn fabric of her dress with trembling fingers. "Rourke, he says I'm no good anymore. That he'll sell me to men who want nothing but a quick death." Behind them, the echo of footsteps and crude laughter rumbled from the saloon. Ethan felt time tighten in his throat. He could leave, pretend he had seen nothing, let the world keep turning in its dirty course. But the memory of other women abandoned, in camps, in burned shacks, came back to him with the weight of conscience. He leaned closer to Clara. "There's a small window. We can get out through there." She studied him, suspicious. She had learned that men's promises were usually paid in pain. But there was something different in Ethan's voice. Not tenderness, but certainty. Slowly she nodded. With his knife blade, Ethan forced the window frame. The wood gave way with a sharp crack. Outside, the yard was deserted, muddy from the rain. He lifted Clara by the waist carefully, avoiding any more touch than necessary. She let him push her through and fell to her knees in the wet earth. At that moment, the door burst open. A drunken man, shirt half open, froze when he saw them. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Carter?" he bellowed. Ethan didn't answer. He leapt through the window after Clara and pulled her into the shadows. Shouts erupted down the hallway. Shoes hammered on wood, chairs toppled. They ran toward the wagon waiting under a shed. Mud splashed to their waists. Ethan jumped up, grabbed the reins, and cracked the mules forward. The wagon lunged onto the main street, wheels throwing dirty water into the night. Behind them, voices multiplied. A shot cracked, ricocheting off an adobe wall, sparking near Clara's shoulder. She flinched, covering her chest with her arms. "Don't look at them," Ethan muttered without turning his head. "Just hold on." Cold wind slapped their faces, mixing with the metallic taste of fear. Clara watched him in profile. The dark beard, the weary eyes, the steady hands. He looked like a rock standing firm. In the storm, as the last houses of Dust Creek fell behind, the noise of pursuit faded. The road opened to the plain, dotted with rain puddles that mirrored the moon between torn clouds. Ethan slowed the mules. His breath was heavy, but his hands didn't shake. He glanced at Clara. "You're out of that prison now. But what comes next won't be easy." Clara looked back at him, voice broken but firm. "I didn't ask you to save me, but I'll never go back to being anyone's slave." For a moment, they stayed silent. The squeak of wheels, the fine drizzle still falling, were the only language. And in that silence opened a certainty. They had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. Dawn was breaking as Ethan Carter's wagon left behind the last shacks of Dust Creek. The ground, still wet from the storm, reflected torn, reddish clouds along the horizon. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder and whiskey from the town fading in the distance. Clara, curled beneath the rough canvas of the wagon, kept her arms crossed over her chest. The ragged cloth barely shielded her from the cold, but she seemed less worried about the weather than about silencing her body so her soul would not scream. Ethan glanced at her while urging the mules forward. The silence between them weighed, as heavy as the desert stretching ahead. The vastness of the Arizona territory greeted them like a wounded beast, far-off mountains wrapped in mist, twisted mesquite shrubs, and a sky that promised fire with the first light. "We can travel a few more hours before the heat falls hard," Ethan said, without taking his eyes off the road. Clara did not answer immediately. Her lips trembled, as if searching for a word she could not find. At last she murmured, barely audible, "How long before they come after us?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "They're already saddling their horses." Men like that never forget. Losing what they think belongs to them hurts more than losing their lives. Clara's heart shrank at those words. The echo of voices at the inn still burned in her memory. "Nobody pays a good price for what's ruined," one had spat the night before. She hugged herself tighter, as if those words still clung to her skin. Ethan noticed the gesture, but said nothing. He had learned long ago that the deepest wounds were not healed with questions, but with time and company. They traveled for hours. The merciless sun climbed high, turning every stone into fire. The air shimmered above the sand. Clara closed her eyes, swaying in the wagon's rhythm, nearly fainting. Ethan stopped the mules near a formation of rocks. "We'll rest here." He jumped down, then held out his hand. She hesitated, as if accepting that help was too intimate a pact. But at last she placed her fingers on his. They were rough, calloused, yet lifted her with unexpected gentleness. They sat in the meager shade of the rock. Ethan uncorked a canteen. "Drink." Clara took a sip. The water was warm and metallic, but it eased her parched throat. Returning the canteen, her eyes met Ethan's. In them was an old weariness, as if he had seen too many things die. "Why did you help me?" she whispered. Ethan took a long moment to answer. He stared toward the horizon, where sand blurred into sky. "Because I've seen what men do when no one stops them. And this time, I refuse to be complicit in silence." Clara pressed her lips together, unable to reply. Those words struck deep, reminding her of the countless times others had turned away. The moment of calm shattered suddenly. A distant gunshot rang off the rocks. Ethan rose at once, revolver in hand. On the ridge, 3 riders cut against the blazing sky. "They found us," he muttered. The horses thundered down the hill, raising clouds of dust. The wind carried their voices. Hand over the half-breed, Carter. You still have time to save your hide. It was the raspy shout of Jed One-Eyed Jack, unmistakable with his mocking tone that froze blood. Ethan turned to Clara. Climb in the wagon and hold on tight. She obeyed, though fear knifed her stomach. Ethan whipped the mules, and the wagon leapt forward. The wheels bounced over rocks, wind lashing their faces, while behind them the riders fired. She's worth nothing, Carter. Just worn-out flesh, one of the pursuers sneered. The words lashed Clara like a whip. She lowered her head, shame and rage colliding inside her. But then she heard Ethan's reply, fierce and burning, hurled into the wind. She's worth more than any of you. The wagon zigzagged across the rough ground. Ethan fired twice. Without slowing, one bullet dug into sand, the other forced a rider to pull his horse aside. The echoes of gunfire scattered among the hills. At last, after a sharp turn, the wagon plunged into a narrow canyon. The rock wall shielded them, and the pursuers fell behind. Ethan halted the panting mules. Silence returned, broken only by the animals' breathing. Clara climbed out of the wagon, trembling. She hugged herself tight, tears burning in her eyes. "Why did you say that?" she asked suddenly, staring at him. "Why shout that I'm worth more than them?" Ethan held her gaze a long while. In his eyes was no easy tenderness, but a raw truth. "Because it's true. And if you forget it, then they've already won." Clara stood motionless. No one had ever spoken to her like that. She had always been cargo, a problem, a burden. For the first time, someone named her as more than what had been done to her. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Not just of fear, but of relief, like an old knot beginning to loosen. Ethan holstered his gun and sat again under the rock. His voice came low, grave. "The desert teaches that what resists survives, and you've resisted. Don't let them decide what you are." The sun was lowering, painting the stones red. Clara, hands still wet with tears, sat beside him. For the first time she didn't need words. Silence was enough, the silence where both their pains found an echo. In the distance, a coyote howled, a lament lost in immensity. Clara rested her head on her knees and whispered, "Maybe this desert can cleanse me too. Burn away what they left behind." Ethan said nothing. He simply let the weight of her words drift between them, like grains of sand carried by the wind. The wagon creaked slowly along the stony path, wheels groaning under the night's weight. Clara, wrapped in a coarse blanket, stared into the horizon without really seeing. The silence between her and Ethan was denser than the cold air of the mountains. Only hours before they had raced between gunshots and shouts. Now all that remained was the echo of hooves fading in memory. When the first pale light of dawn slipped between the ridges, the silhouette of an abandoned mission appeared before them. Its adobe walls, cracked and crumbling, rose like old bones in the desert. The crooked cross above no longer called with bells, silent for decades. Ethan pulled on the reins and murmured, "We'll rest here a while." Clara followed him inside. The gate had fallen, choked by dry vines. Within, weeds grew tall around a dry fountain. In one corner, a small chapel still stood, the air thick with dust and unlit candles. There they were met by Reverend Samuel Whitaker, an old man in a gray robe whose weary eyes seemed to have seen too much pain in this land. "Your footsteps echo with the weight of hunted souls," he said, asking no questions. Ethan bowed his head, as if accepting the charge. Clara, trembling between fear and pride, gripped the chapel doorframe. "We just need shelter for a few hours," Ethan said. "God's roof does not ask for names," replied the Reverend. "But it does demand truth." They stayed. The Reverend gave them water in a clay jar and a little hard bread. Clara took it with hands that still remembered the ropes that had scarred her skin. In the chapel's dim light, she sat before the ruined altar. Her voice came cracked, yet firm. They ripped me from my people like cattle, promised to sell me to men who pay to destroy bodies. I was nothing but a price. Ethan, standing by the broken window, listened with lips pressed tight. He did not dare look at her. And you? Clara asked suddenly, her eyes flashing with challenge. Why did you save me? Out of pity, or because you saw yourself in me? Ethan swallowed hard. The memory of war slashed back. Women dragged from homes, children abandoned in ashes. Closing his eyes, he said, I didn't want to stand by and feel my silence become another bullet. A man doesn't have to shoot to kill, sometimes doing nothing does the same. The Reverend sighed. The desert is full of ghosts. The ones we killed and the ones we left to die. Forgiveness begins when we name them. Clara bowed her head. Silent tears dampened the edge of her blanket. It was not the plea of a child, but the deep weeping of someone who had witnessed too much injustice. Just then, a pounding shook the chapel door. 3 men appeared in the courtyard, boots dusty, laughter reeking of saloon whiskey. One, scar-faced, shouted, Old preacher! They say you're hiding merchandise. A half-breed girl. Hand her over. The Reverend straightened, bent with age but firm. This house no longer trades. Executioners don't enter here. The man spat on the ground. Since when does a preacher decide the living's fate? That girl isn't worth half a dime. We'll sell her even if her tongue bites dust. Ethan's blood burned. Calmly, chillingly, his hand went to his revolver. The men tensed. Clara whispered, No. I don't want more blood spilled for me. Ethan looked at her deeply. In her eyes he saw a wound not his, yet one he carried all the same. I won't fire, he said at last. But I won't let them take you either. The men laughed with contempt, mistaking him for weak. Then keep your trash. When you're done with her, we'll come back for what's left. They left behind the stench of threat. The Reverend closed the door with trembling hands. Clara sobbed once, sharp and brief, like expelling poison. You heard them? She said, her voice breaking. To them I'm trash. Not a woman, not a daughter, not a sister, just a body. Ethan approached slowly, careful not to shatter what was fragile. You are not what they say. You are what you remember of yourself, and what you decide to be now. The silence wrapped around them. Only the wind whistled through the cracks in the roof. Clara lifted her gaze. For the first time, she did not speak with rage, but with a thread of hope. And if I don't know who I am anymore? Ethan raised his hand but stopped halfway. He didn't touch her, only held it close. A promise. Then we'll walk until you find out. The Reverend looked at them both and murmured, The desert steals names, but it also offers new roads. If you walk together, you might find one. That night they slept beneath the broken roof of the mission. Clara, wrapped in her blanket, closed her eyes without fear for the first time in years. Ethan sat at the door, revolver across his lap, his gaze fixed on the fire. At dawn, the Reverend blessed them. Take this silence as a shield. It won't last forever, but it will teach you to hear what truly matters. Ethan and Clara stepped back onto the dusty trail. No certainty, only the echo of shared footsteps. But in their eyes something had shifted. The wound no longer bled alone. The sun had barely dipped behind the hills when Ethan and Clara reached the edge of a cornfield. The night wind whispered through the tall, dry stalks, producing a harsh murmur as if the land held secrets too old to speak. The sky, still glowing with violet embers, foretold a heavy night. Ethan halted the wagon. The horses panted, leather reins slick with sweat. He glanced at Clara, who sat upright though her hands trembled in her lap. We'll wait here, he said quietly. The corn will cover us for a while, she nodded. Her dark eyes scanned the mountains as though expecting the ghosts of her past to rise from the shadows. Suddenly, the distant echo of hooves and voices drifted on the wind. Ethan's jaw tightened. They found us. He drew his revolver and checked it with quick, practiced movements. The dance of a man long familiar with danger. Clara watched him with a mix of fear and trust. "Why do you keep risking your life for me?" she asked, her voice trembling between reproach and gratitude. Ethan didn't answer at once, his gaze fixed on the rows of corn stretching like an unmoving sea. At last he said, "Because I've seen too many women surrendered to silence. I won't let you become another shadow." The crunch of stalks grew nearer. 3 riders emerged from the gloom, led by Jed One-Eyed Jack. His scar glinted like hot iron under the moon. "Look at them," he roared, "the half-breed and her cheap savior. Get down from that wagon, or we'll hang. You both right here." Clara shivered, but she held her ground. Ethan raised his weapon, his voice steady. "Step closer and you'll pay dearly." Jed barked a bitter laugh. "You? One man against us? What do you think she's worth? She's already spoiled fit only for the saloon trade." The words cut Clara like blades. She closed her eyes, memories slashing through her. Betrayal, captivity, humiliation. When she opened them again, something had changed. Fear still lingered, but a spark of dignity burned bright. "I'm not what you say," she whispered, though barely above a breath. Ethan heard that fragile thread and forged it into steel. "She doesn't belong to you," he shouted. "And you'll never call her that again." The riders advanced. The crack of the first gunshot split the air like thunder. Horses reared. The cornfield became a labyrinth of shadows and sparks. Ethan fired back. One man toppled with a strangled cry, vanishing among the stalks. Clara ran toward a ditch at the field's edge, heart pounding like a drum. Around her the leaves tore with bullets, curses, and the hiss of lead. Jed lunged out of the stalks, knife gleaming in hand, rage twisting his face. "You're heroes." "Dying," he spat. "And you'll come back with me if I have to drag you by the hair." Clara backed away, but she did not scream. Ethan's words echoed in her chest. "You will not be another shadow." A shot rang. Yet's knife fell into the dirt. Ethan appeared, blood trickling from a graze on his arm, eyes burning. "She's chosen her path," he said, cold as stone. Jed staggered back, clutching his shoulder. He spat at the ground. "This isn't over, Carter. The earth swallows fools who think themselves righteous." He fled, dragging the last of his men with him. The field fell silent, broken only by the crackle of leaves scorched by gunfire. Ethan breathed hard, holstered his weapon, and searched. For Clara, he found her standing among the stalks, lips tight, skin streaked with dirt. He stepped toward her, and she collapsed into his arms, as if all her years of fear had finally found a place to fall. "I thought it would all be the same again," she whispered. "The silence, the chains." Ethan brushed her hair gently, his voice low, almost a prayer. "No, not while I breathe." She raised her gaze. Tears shone, but behind them glimmered something new, a spark of faith. "You're a strange man, Ethan. You could leave me and be safe. But you stay." He gave a tired, sincere smile. "Some wounds only heal when they're shared. Maybe yours and mine aren't so far apart." The wind gusted, snuffing out the last sparks in the cornfield. Clara leaned her forehead against his chest. In that silent gesture, something stronger. Then gunfire was born, a pact of scars, of endurance, of a promise never to surrender. Far away, the hoofbeats of their enemies faded into the night. But between Ethan and Clara remained a wordless vow. They would face whatever came, together. The moon broke free of the clouds, bathing the ruined field in silver. Amid the devastation, a small miracle stood. 2 wounded souls who, instead of breaking, had found the strength to hold one another. The sun slanted through the clouds as the wagon descended into a narrow valley. Where a stream wound among tall cottonwoods, their leaves trembling in the warm afternoon wind. The sound of water whispered like a secret, so different from the gunfire and shouting that still echoed in Clara's memory. Ethan halted the wagon. Beside the stream, silence unfolded like a protective cloak. For the first time since their escape from Dust Creek, there were no hoofprints behind them, no dust on the horizon, only this green valley, like a hidden refuge waiting for them. Clara climbed down slowly. Her hands trembled as she brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead. She leaned over the clear water. In its reflection, she saw a face hardened by fear, shadows etched beneath young eyes. She whispered, almost inaudible, "I've forgotten how it feels to see myself without chains in my gaze." Ethan, unhitching the horses, heard her but did not move closer. His voice carried low, weighted with both weariness and tenderness. "Chains break, Clara. The water knows. It always keeps moving." She looked at him sidelong. Distrust still kept her upright, yet something in the valley softened the rigidity she had clung to in the darkness of the inn. They built a small fire with dry branches. Ethan drew from his saddlebag hard bread and jerky. Almost instinctively, Clara helped him shred the meat into thinner strips, soaking them in the stream. For the first time, they did something together without the urgency of flight. While they ate, Clara lifted her eyes to the cottonwoods. Golden light slipped between the branches, painting her skin with a warm glow. "My mother used to sing beneath trees," she said softly, not looking at him. "She said the leaves carried prayers we didn't know how to say aloud." Ethan swallowed slowly, as if her words lingered in his throat. "I didn't grow up with songs," he admitted. "My father only knew the sound of spurs and the crack of a whip. I learned silence before I learned words." A long pause followed, full of things neither dared touch. The stream kept running. Later, as Clara washed her blouse in the water, a sharp gunshot echoed from the distance. They both froze. Ethan rushed to the wagon, rifle ready. But the echo died quickly. Perhaps a hunter, perhaps a reminder that danger was never far. Clara's face glistened with drops from the stream. "There will always be men hunting us," she murmured, "selling us like mules." Ethan lowered the rifle slowly. The hardness in his eyes cracked for a moment. "As long as I breathe, they won't lay a finger on you." She said nothing, only wrung out the cloth in her hands, as though his promise was too heavy to bear. Yet, evening slipped into night. Another fire crackled, its sound the only music. Ethan sat sharpening his knife, sometimes lifting his eyes to Clara, wrapped in a blanket. She looked younger in the fire's glow, as if fear had stepped back a pace. She spoke in a trembling voice that carried new courage. "Sometimes I dream. I return to Dust Creek, but no one knows me. I walk among the people like a ghost, as if I had already died there." Ethan sheathed the knife and leaned slightly toward her. "You're no ghost, you're here, and so am I." For the first time, Clara looked at him without the veil of distrust. Her eyes moistened. "And if I'm just a burden?" she asked. Harshly, "You could leave me here and save yourself." His jaw tightened. His answer was rough, almost harsh. "If you think I'd abandon someone once I've taken them into my hands, then you don't see me clearly." She lowered her head, ashamed. The fire popped, filling the space with all that was left unsaid. Hours later, when the night wind stirred the treetops, Clara moved closer to the flames and sat beside him. Her voice shook, but it carried the beginning of strength. "I lost faith in men since I was a girl. Everyone who promised to care for me ended up giving me away to someone crueler. Every hand that touched me only took, never gave." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Memories of women's screams during war, bodies left behind, rushed back. His fingers dug into the damp soil, as if anchoring him against drowning in the past. "I'm no better than them for the battles I fought," he murmured. "But with you, I want to be different. I want to learn another way to hold a life." His words hung in the air. Clara received them like someone slowly opening a long-locked door. She said nothing, but slid her hand close to the edge of his blanket. Not an embrace, not a kiss, just the faint touch of two fabrics sharing warmth. At dawn, before the sky blushed pink, a hoarse voice rose from the opposite ridge. "Carter!" It spat with scorn. "Give back what's ours, or your corpse will." Serve as warning. Ethan jumped to his feet, rifle ready. Clara held her breath. 3 silhouettes appeared on horseback. One laughed cruelly. "Half-breeds aren't worth more than empty bottles, and still we sell them dear. Hand her over, and you live." Clara closed her eyes. The venom of those words was familiar, a reopened scar. When she opened them again, she saw Ethan standing, firm before the fire. "She's not merchandise," he said, his voice low, icy. "And she's not yours." A tense silence stretched. The men hesitated, weighing his resolve. At last they spat curses and turned their horses, their threats, fading into the night. Clara exhaled, hands shaking. Ethan didn't move until the shadows were gone. Then he sat again, rifle loaded. She watched him for a long time before whispering, voice trembling, that phrase, "No one had ever said it for me." Ethan looked at her, surprised at the fragility within her words. "Then hear it well," he answered gently. "You're not merchandise. You never were." Tears slid freely down her cheeks. She didn't try to hide them. Under the cottonwoods, trembling as if their leaves prayed in silence, Clara found the first crack of peace after years of darkness. Dawn found them still seated by the dying fire, knowing their flight was not over, but something new had begun. A silent pact, woven with dignity restored and the promise they would not be alone. On the road ahead, the valley no longer felt safe. Though the strangers had ridden off, Clara sensed the shadow of their return. Ethan, too, kept his rifle near, his body taut like a bowstring even when the fire dwindled to embers. At dawn, he led the horses along the stream, deeper into the cottonwoods, searching for a hidden pass. Clara followed in silence, her bare feet brushing the wet grass, her blouse still damp from the night before. They found a cave carved into the side of a ridge. The stone was cool, the air smelling faintly of ash and earth. Here they settled, for a moment's rest. Clara leaned against the rock, closing her eyes. She tried to imagine this was a journey of her own choosing, not one forced by pursuit. But the faces of men who had owned her body flickered like ghosts. She pulled her knees to her chest and whispered, "They'll never stop." Ethan crouched by the cave's mouth, sharpening his knife again, though the blade no longer needed it, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "They'll try," he said, voice flat, "but I've outlasted worse." Clara studied him. In the dim light, his features seemed carved from granite, scarred, unyielding. She had heard whispers in Dust Creek that Ethan Carter had been a soldier, one who carried not only weapons, but sins no priest could wash away. She asked softly, "What did you leave behind, Ethan?" For a long time he didn't answer. Only. The crack of the whetstone echoed. Finally he spoke. "Bodies. Women. Children. I marched through towns where nothing lived after we left. I told myself I had no choice, that I followed orders. But at night, when I close my eyes, I see them. Not the men I fought, the innocents." His voice broke slightly, a rough edge Clara had never heard. She felt both fear and pity, two threads tangled. "You think that makes you like them?" She said carefully, "But it doesn't. You stood between me and those men. No one else ever has." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Don't make me into something I'm not. I'm no savior. I've killed too much to wear that name." Clara moved closer, daring to rest a hand lightly on his arm. "Then maybe you're a man who's tired of being a weapon." The words settled between them. Ethan looked at her hand, then into her eyes. He said nothing, but the silence carried more than denial. It carried longing. That night, they lit no fire. The cave was their only shield. Clara lay awake listening to Ethan's breathing, steady but restless. She thought of the girl she had been before men bargained her away, a girl who had believed in laughter and songs. Somewhere deep, she felt that girl stir faintly, as if Ethan's confession had cracked open a door, not only in him but in her. Near dawn, thunder rumbled across the mountains. The storm came swift, rain sweeping through the valley. Water drummed against the rocks. Clara pressed against Ethan as the cave filled with chill wind. He did not pull away. His warmth was the only barrier against the cold. For the first time, she did not feel like stolen property, but like someone sheltered. Yet fate was not finished testing them. At the storm's height, a figure appeared at the cave's mouth, soaked, armed, his face half hidden by a wide hat. Ethan's hand flew to his rifle. The man raised both palms, voice hoarse. "Easy, Carter. I ain't here to fight." "Not unless you make me." Clara's breath caught. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Recognition flared like lightning. "Logan Pierce," he spat, the name bitter. "I thought you rotted in Yuma prison." The stranger smirked, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Not all chains hold, and some debts don't die. You've got something of mine, and I've come to collect." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her. This was no random pursuer. This was a piece of Ethan's past, come alive, demanding payment. And from the way Logan's eyes slid toward her, she feared she already knew the price. The cave turned into a crucible of silence. Rain hammered the rocks outside, thunder rolled across the valley. But inside only 3 figures breathed. Clara pressed against the wall. Ethan crouched with his rifle aimed, and Logan Pierce standing tall with a grin too sharp for comfort. "You've got nerve showing your face," Ethan said, voice low, steady as iron. "Last I saw you, you left men to die in the desert for your own escape." Logan chuckled, water dripping from his hat. "And you? You followed orders that butchered families. Don't stand there preaching about honor." Clara's stomach knotted. She looked at Ethan, but his face was carved stone. Still, his silence confirmed what Logan said. The past Ethan had confessed was no invention. It was truth, raw and merciless. "What do you want?" Ethan asked. Logan's eyes slid toward Clara. "Her, not for what you think. She's my proof. Men out there will pay for her return. They'll believe anything I tell them about her, about you." Clara's pulse hammered. She whispered, "I'm not a thing to be traded." Logan smirked. "That's the lie you want to believe, girl. But men like us, we know the world don't work that way." Ethan shifted, finger taut on the trigger. "She's not leaving with you." For a heartbeat, the storm seemed to hold its breath. Logan's smile thinned. "You'd kill me for her, after everything you've already done." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yes." Lightning split the sky. Logan moved in the flash, hand flying to his revolver. The cave exploded with sound. A gunshot cracked, stone chips sprayed. Clara screamed and dropped to the floor. The smell of powder filled the air. When the smoke cleared, Logan stood with his hat blown from his head, blood streaking his temple. His revolver clattered uselessly to the ground. Ethan held his rifle steady, chest heaving. "Walk away," he ordered. Logan laughed, hoarsely, clutching his wound. "You think one bullet ends this?" "No, Carter. You've just lit the fire. Every man who remembers what we did, what you did, will come. And they'll take more than her." He staggered back into the rain, disappearing into the storm. The sound of his footsteps faded, swallowed by thunder. Clara crawled toward Ethan. Trembling, "He'll come back." Ethan nodded, lowering the rifle slowly. His hands shook for the first time she'd seen. "He will. And when he does, the truth about me will come with him." Clara touched his arm, desperate. "I don't care what you were. I care what you are now." "But..." Ethan looked into the storm, haunted. "What I am now is a man marked by blood, and blood always finds its way home." By the time Ethan and Clara reached the town of Dust Creek, Dawn had broken pale and gray. The storm had passed, leaving the ground soaked and the streets slick with mud. The town looked almost peaceful, but Ethan felt the weight of eyes on him as he led Clara down the main street. The saloon doors creaked open, and Reverend Samuel Whitaker stepped out, his worn Bible tucked under one arm. His gaze sharpened the moment he saw them. "You're being hunted," he said without preamble. "Word came in the night, Logan. Pierce rode through, bleeding but alive. He swore you'd betrayed him. Men are listening." Ethan's gut twisted. Dust Creek was a place he'd once called refuge, but now whispers stirred like dry grass before fire. Every passing glance, every hushed voice, carried the taste of suspicion. Clara held her chin high despite her trembling. "We did nothing wrong," she said, though her voice faltered. "Why won't they believe us?" Reverend Whitaker's expression softened. "Because, child, truth often wears a mask, and lies wear a friendly face." He looked at Ethan. "You need to decide what you're running from and what you're willing to stand for." Ethan swallowed hard, but before he could answer, hoofbeats thundered down the street. A band of riders swept in, faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats, rifles slung low. At their head rode a man Ethan recognized, Marshal Caleb Rhodes, lawman of Dust Creek, his badge catching the morning light. "Carter," Rhodes called, voice cold as steel. "Step away from the girl." Clara clutched Ethan's arm, panic flashing in her eyes. "No." Ethan squared his shoulders, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. "She's under my protection." Rhodes' hand hovered near his revolver. "Not anymore. You're accused of murder, Ethan Carter. Logan Pierce is spreading word you betrayed your own men. Folks want justice. And if you won't face it like a man, they'll drag you to the gallows." The crowd gathered, quick merchants, ranchers, women with baskets in hand, all staring, whispering. Dust Creek itself seemed to hold its breath. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady despite her. "Fear, he saved me. He's no traitor." But Rhodes' eyes were fixed on Ethan, unyielding. "Your past is caught up, Carter. You can't outrun it forever." Ethan's jaw clenched. For the first time, Clara saw a flicker of defeat in his eyes. Yet beneath it, something harder sparked to life. He reached for her hand. "If I stand trial, they'll never hear your voice. Only his lies." Clara tightened her grip. "Then we fight the lies, together." The marshal's men closed in, boots splashing mud, rifles ready. Dust Creek was no longer a haven. It was a trap tightening around them both. By dusk, the town square had turned into a stage. The gallows loomed tall against the setting sun, its rope swaying like a vulture's shadow. Dust Creek buzzed with restless voices as townsfolk gathered, some with anger, others with curiosity. In the center stood Ethan Carter, wrists bound, guarded by Marshal Caleb Rhodes and his men. Clara fought through the crowd, her heart hammering. She saw the fear in Ethan's eyes, buried deep beneath his calm face, and it tore at her. She would not let him fall to a lie. Reverend Samuel Whitaker stood at the edge of the platform, Bible in hand, his voice booming. "The truth will outlive the gallows. Judge not by the tongue of a traitor, but by the deeds of a man." Logan Pierce pushed his way forward, his arm still bound from the wound Ethan had given him. His voice dripped poison. "This man betrayed us. He left his brothers to die in Apache Canyon. I alone live to tell it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had lived with the shadow of Apache Canyon too long, but the truth was not what Pierce claimed. His voice rang out, clear as iron. "I didn't abandon my men. Logan did. He sold us out for silver and left us to burn. I pulled the last of them out with these hands while he rode away laughing." Murmurs spread. Some faces turned doubtful, others hardened. The weight of judgment swung with every whisper. Clara stepped onto the platform, her voice steady. "I was there when he saved me." Ethan Carter has risked everything for others, while Logan. Pierce twists words to hide his shame. She turned to the crowd, her dark eyes blazing. Ask yourself, what has Logan ever given you but fear and broken promises? Pierce's face darkened, his hand sliding toward his pistol. Enough! Lies, girl. Marshal Rhodes raised his hand sharply. There'll be no blood here, not unless it's by law. But his eyes lingered on Pierce, doubt beginning to crack his cold certainty. Ethan lifted his chin. If you want my life, take it. But know this truth will stand when the rope rots away. And Clara's voice will not be silenced. For a long, breathless moment, the crowd wavered. The rope creaked in the wind, and Dust Creek stood divided between the gallows and the truth, between Pierce's venom and Clara's fire. And then, from the back of the crowd, a weathered rancher called out, I remember Apache Canyon. Carter rode through the night to drag out survivors. He saved my boy. Another voice followed, then another. The tide shifted, slow but sure, as memory rose against Pierce's lies. The marshal's hand dropped from his revolver. This town won't hang a man on one man's word. Logan Pierce's snarl cut the air. Then I'll hang him myself, he lunged, steel flashing. But Ethan was faster, breaking free of his bonds in a surge of fury. The two men crashed into each other, fists and rage flying as the crowd scattered. The gallows shook with their struggle. Truth and lies clashed beneath the blood-red sky, and Dust Creek held its breath for the reckoning. Dust Creek woke to the sound of boots on dirt and the sharp clatter of rifles being readied. The night had broken into chaos after Ethan's fight. With Logan Pierce, but by dawn, the town square was silent, waiting. Everyone knew it would end today with gunpowder and blood. Ethan stood at the edge of the street, revolver at his side. Clara was behind him, her hand clutching his sleeve, but her eyes fierce. She would not stop him, not now. Some truths demanded fire to burn away the lies. Logan Pierce strode from the shadows of the livery stable, his face twisted with rage, his arm still bandaged but his hand steady on the pistol. Behind him, a few loyal men lingered, but their eyes darted with unease. They knew Pierce's grip on Dust Creek was cracking. The townsfolk lined the wooden porches, their whispers carrying like dry leaves in the wind. Marshal Rhodes stood too. One side, his badge heavy on his chest, knowing law had failed and only lead would decide justice. Pierce's voice cut the air. This ends here, Carter. You'll die like the dogs you left in Apache Canyon. Ethan's jaw hardened. And you'll choke on every lie you ever spat. The two men faced each other, 10 paces apart. Silence fell, thick as dust, broken only by the creak of a swinging sign and the rustle of skirts. Time slowed to a heartbeat. Then steel flashed. 2 pistols roared. The first bullet grazed Ethan's shoulder, spinning him back, but his shot flew true. Pierce staggered, clutching his chest, fury and disbelief burning in his eyes as he fell to his knees. His pistol clattered on the ground. The street erupted. Pierce's men hesitated, their loyalty shattered, then dropped their weapons and fled. The crowd surged, gasps and cries filling the air. Clara ran to Ethan, her hands trembling as she pressed against his wound. Pierce spat blood, his voice ragged. They'll never forgive you. Ethan knelt beside him, his shadow long. In the morning light. Dust Creek doesn't need your forgiveness. It needs truth. Pierce's last breath rattled in his throat. His body slumped to the dirt, the weight of his lies collapsing with him. Silence hung heavy. Then, slowly, the people of Dust Creek stepped forward, ranchers, blacksmiths, mothers, clutching children. One by one, they looked at Ethan, not with suspicion, but with something new: respect, gratitude, hope. Clara took Ethan's hand, her voice soft but unshaken. It's over. But Ethan knew the gun smoke lingered, and healing would take more than one dawn. Still, as he looked into Clara's eyes, he saw something he thought he'd lost long ago: a future. Dust Creek had been written in blood. Now maybe it could be rewritten in light. Dust Creek awoke the next morning to a quiet it hadn't known in years. The smell of gunpowder had faded, replaced by the clean scent of mesquite and the faint perfume of wildflowers growing along the creek. For the first time, the town did not tremble under the weight of Logan Pierce's shadow. It breathed. Ethan sat on the wooden steps outside the saloon, his arm bandaged, his face pale but steady. Clara was beside him, her hand resting on his, anchoring him to this new dawn. Around them, the townsfolk moved slowly, like people learning to live again. Shopkeepers swept dust from their thresholds. Children ran barefoot across the square. Even the old church bell rang, not for mourning, but for hope. Marshal Rhodes approached, his hat in his hands. "Carter," he said quietly, "Dust Creek owes you more than words. You gave us back our town." Ethan met his eyes, weary but resolute. "No, Marshal. Clara gave you back your town. I just stood in the way long enough for her light to reach it." Clara's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. Her gaze held Ethan's, steady as the earth beneath them. By noon, the townsfolk gathered in the square. They spoke not of vengeance or fear, but of rebuilding. Fences to mend, wells to dig, a future to carve out with their own hands. And for the first time, they asked Ethan and Clara to stand with them, not as outcasts, but as part of Dust Creek's family. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, Ethan and Clara walked to the edge of the valley. The land stretched wide, scarred but fertile, waiting for seeds of change. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "You believe it?" she whispered. "That something good can grow here?" Ethan looked out at the land, then down at her, his voice rough with emotion. "With you beside me, I believe anything." In the distance, the creek glimmered silver in the moonlight, carrying with it the promise of renewal. The town had been broken, but now it stood on the edge of rebirth. And for Ethan, Carter, and Clara, Dust Creek was no longer just a place of blood and secrets. It was home. The story of Dust Creek had been written in sorrow. But now, beneath the wide and merciful sky, it began again, in love, in truth, in hope.